While some in Judaism have come to understand that Yeshua wasn't trying to establish a new religion, they instead give a lot of the credit and blame for the creation of Christianity to the Jewish apostle to the Gentiles, Paul. But despite that undeserved and unsupported claim, the fact of the matter is that, number 5, Paul didn't start Christianity. At no time did he ever turn away from his Jewishness. On the contrary, after becoming a believer in Yeshua, Paul still called himself a Hebrew of Hebrews. As a devoted Jew, he continued to make sacrifices at the temple. And we also see Paul in Acts 20:16 rushing to Jerusalem to keep the feast, something that an adherent to Christianity would hardly consider a priority. In his writings, Paul would often demonstrate his devotion to the Torah, even going so far as to state unequivocally in Romans 3:31, "Do we then make Torah useless through the faith in Messiah? Let it not be. Rather, we make Torah stand." So while Paul had certainly turned away from traditional Judaism, as he indicates in Galatians 1:13, there was nothing in his demeanor, actions, or attitudes that would indicate that he walked away from the Jewish faith of Scripture. There's a difference. In fact, his mission to the nations was completely in line with the prophet Isaiah's stated goal for Israel, which Paul cites in Acts 13:47. "I have set you Jews as a light for the Gentiles, for your being for salvation to the end of the earth." Paul had the full support of the Messianic Jewish leadership in Jerusalem to continue to bring the good news of Yeshua to the Gentiles. And yet, everywhere he went, he would still always go first to the Jews. Paul's calling to the nations in no way compromised either the faith of his fathers or his allegiance to his people. As we hear from his heart in Romans chapter 10, verse 1, "Brothers, the pleasure of my heart, indeed, and my request for help to God for Israel is for salvation." And in chapter 11, verses 25 and 26, he explains how hardness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. And so all Yisrael will be saved. Paul saw the salvation of the Gentiles in part as a means to the salvation of the Jewish people. Paul never envisioned, much less would have approved of, a Christianity so divorced from the fate of the Jewish people. It isn't Paul's fault that Christians twisted his words and took him out of context. It isn't Paul's fault that, despite his best efforts, Christians distanced themselves from Jews, while many of his own brothers distanced themselves from their Messiah. The development and existence of institutional Christianity cannot be credited to or blamed on Paul. He was faithful to his Messiah and his people to the end.